Good morning and welcome. This is the Veterans Forum. This program is coming to you from the studios here at Bedford, New Hampshire. Today is the 15th of June, 2017. My name is Bob Stevens, and I've been doing this show now, they tell me, for 11 years. We've had all kinds of stories, good and bad, but all of them are what we've done really at the request of the Library of Congress under their program called the Veterans History Project, which was started back in the year 2000. They've asked this station and stations like it and guys like me throughout the country if they can and will make available their talents and equipment so that any guy or gal who served anywhere in any of the wars or conflicts, as they're sometimes called, can have a chance to relate and share some of their experiences and the impact that it's had on their life and their family. A lot of the guys, the older fellows, when I was working in the World War II time frame, if you will, the attitude then was, well, I had a job to do and I did it. I went back home and went to work, for those of us who returned. And you don't have to be Audie Murphy. The problem we're having is getting these guys and gals to share their experiences so that the people coming after us will have a better story and a better idea of what really went wrong. We have another one like that today, but before I start that, I'd like to mention something that I think is important to every one of you guys and gals out there. This number, 211, is a special link in the telephone system throughout the state of New Hampshire. We ask that any guy or gal, or their friends if they feel it, need some help in some manner. Call that number, 211. It'll put you in a cadre of some 25 or 26. You can't read this, but they're there to help you. The only requirement, you've had to have at least 6 months active service and an honorable discharge. Beyond that, it's there for you to take. It's for your benefit. You've worked for it, you've earned it. If you need it, please use it. Now today we have another wonderful story, and as most of them are getting to be, we have more history than we have time, so I'm at too many questions. I'll just ask Peter, if he will, to introduce himself, and then we'll take the show from there. And with that, young sir, would you introduce yourself? Tell us where you now live, your branch of service, active service, and your service dates.
Sure. It's really wonderful to be still known as one of the young guys. I appreciate that.
Sonny.
And hopefully this will all be a good story. And I did have a wide-ranging experience through my 21 years of active duty in the United States Navy. I raised my hand in 1970. That's its own story. Maybe we'll get into that a little bit later. But I went active duty in 72 as I graduated from Springfield College. And then...
Time?
What?
Where do you now live?
Oh, you want to cover that?
We want to find who you are now. Then we'll go back and find out how you got here.
Well,
if you can.
I was born in Laconia, New Hampshire.
When?
And that was in 1950, March of 1950.
That's why I call you Sonny.
So I'm currently 67. And yes, and I am married to a wonderful young lady, as you would like to say, Susie Burdett. And we have 4 kids, and but I grew up somewhat in New Hampshire, but also somewhat in Massachusetts. We have a place on a lake in the Lakes region that we always went to all summers, and had a lot of interesting work experiences.
Is that in Massachusetts or New Hampshire?
So that was in New Hampshire, at the Lakes region.
Okay.
So our house that we have up there now, is on the old family property. And I have had experiences when I was growing up at Alacoy State Park as a lifeguard. And then, I went to Springfield College in Springfield, Mass. I was a physical education major with a work physiology background kind of tied in on that. And joined the Navy, raised my hand in 1970.
Okay. Now,
so did you want to know more about that deeper background? Or?
Yes.
Okay. What
not the amount of fingers, but I'm very curious as to what kind of a student were you in high school and college. not to put you down, but if you were
okay, we can get into some of that detail. When I was in high school, I was the typical guy that did all the typical things. I was on the swim team. I was in the YMCA as what they called the YMCA Junior Leader Corps, and so I had good grades, and I took some of the technical stuff. The only class I really had a lot of problem with was Latin. It took me 3 years to get through 2 years of Latin.
Well, you got there, though.
And then when I started dreaming the Latin declensions, I thought maybe I had had enough of that foreign language stuff. So I've never really been hot for foreign languages. But, the technical stuff and that was all, just fine as far as my learning throughout high school. And then...
well, excuse me, but as a teenager, did you have the physical chance of having your own car to tinker with and become somewhat mechanically?
I did. I got my own car when I got to college. I did, and it was an old rattle trap that my uncle sold me for $25, and I had all kinds of interesting repair experiences with that car. I rebuilt generators, and when he ran it without oil in it for a bit, that kind of slowed it down a lot.
Yeah,
but
raised as heck with the bearings.
So
too.
So I had to replace the lower bearings because it was hard to get to the upper bearings. I put an upper lubrication kit in it, and when it started, the rings had to kind of build up a little bit of compression. So you probably remember this from some of these old six-banger straight line engines. But so it was a big car, not a very powerful engine, perfect for a young teenager, hard to get in trouble with, and I had some experiences with working on that old car.
And the best was then, though, you had room to maneuver. Today you can't open the hood and find.
Oh yeah, there was all kinds of room to play in there. Nowadays it's really hard to do those kind of work. But I think that high school and college was a great preparing opportunity for my follow-on military career. And in college, you asked me how I was doing in college. I did pretty well in college once I figured out the code. And you got to remember that back in those days, there was no cell phone, there was no computer, there was no opportunity to use a calculator. And I learned a slide rule when I was in high school.
Log, deci, log.
The sliding along, moving the lever. Anyway, slide rules. But and in college, when you needed to type a paper, you didn't sit down at the keyboard and make all the corrections and the spell check and the grammar check and all that stuff. You had to use a piece of paper, and if you made a mistake, you put in another piece of paper, you started all over again.
No whiteouts.
Well, those whiteouts on papers were not good, so if you were really good, you had these what they call traceable bond, where you could erase it a little bit. But I think that the most spectacular thing that happened to me during my college years at Springfield College, down in Springfield, Mass, was that during this period of time from 68 to 72 when I graduated, there was the Vietnam War going on. And we had the Students for Democratic Society, the SDS, we had all these protests going on, all this stuff that I was not involved with because I was on the swim team and I was swimming, and I was a busy athlete along with my college studies. And because of these unrest periods, the college made a decision through a colloquium process to start something that a lot of colleges did also at the same time, and that is to have a student sit on the board of trustees of the college as a full voting member.
With full rights and privileges?
Full rights and privileges.
Okay.
So they had an election. I was one of the 3 top vote getters. I was presented to the board of trustees. They picked me because I was the guy that had already raised my hand as a naval reservist, I think, at that point, other than the other 2. But I seemed, I think, to them as one of their more, ones that they could communicate with better. And anyway, so I was the ‑1 student trustee of a program that Springfield College has continued to run, and we've just had a 45th year a couple of years ago, and then we're looking at having a 50th anniversary in 2021 of the student trustee program at Springfield College. Pretty cool. And I'm involved with helping to plan that as we go forward.
Very good. That keeps your sidetrack busy.
So yeah, that's the some of the other stuff I do besides all
now
the
you
things I
just
do in
said
the
that
state
you
of
were
New
the
Hampshire.
Naval Reserve. When did you join the Naval Reserve?
Well, I joined the Naval Reserve in 1970.
Was that through ROTC at the school, or?
No, it was not a ROTC program, but that is when I was walking through the student union on a sunny, afternoon, and I was challenged by these two guys, these two lieutenants, and their summer white uniforms.
All crisp.
It's summer white uniforms. I've got one of those. I still wear it, and
Show off.
It's one of those opportunities for people to ask me, where the ice cream is being served. But anyway, these two guys challenged me and said, "Are you good enough to be a naval aviator?" Well, I think so. But so what's the deal? I said, well, you got to take a test. Okay. Well, taking tests takes a lot of time. So do you got some kind of, something that I get for doing all of this?
A little payback?
A little payback, if you will. And they said, well, yeah, we've got an aircraft parked out at the local airport. You want to go flying? So yeah, I'll take the test if you're going to take me flying. So I took the test, and it was not a really complicated test. I think it was a form of the ASVAB to see if you've got spatial orientation skills.
Gears and that sort of
yeah, thing. Yeah. If this gear is going this way, what direction is that gear going? Well, you just kind of look through the gears and look at the directions, and you can figure it out. So it was not hard, but it was basic knowledge of mechanical skills and thoughts about, if the aircraft has got an attitude like this, what's the pilot seeing? It wasn't all that hard. So I passed, obviously, and they did take me flying, and I did well during the flight. Didn't get sick, didn't get squirrely on them, and they kind of liked that, and invited me to come get a flight physical.
Did they give you the stick while you were up there?
Oh yeah. They let me hold the stick a little bit. So you can't be afraid to fly. So anyway, they said, come on down to South Weymouth Naval Air Station. When South Weymouth Naval Air Station was still an entity. It's well closed down now for many, many years. We'll do a flight physical and see if you got the physical stuff to do this. And all right, that's interesting, but that's a pretty far away. I mean, I just can't show up at 7 o'clock in the morning by getting up really early in the morning and take that flight physical. Well, no problem with that. We're going to put you up in the BOQ, and we're going to feed you dinner, and we'll feed you breakfast, and we'll make sure that you don't get lost. You get to the clinic, all right, and we'll get your flight physical. And then it says, but that's a really long way. I mean, is there another one of those flights in the offering here? And I said, yeah, all right, we'll take you flying. And so I went and got my physical, and and true military physical form, no orifice was left unprobed. They looked at your eyes and your ears.
Oh, you got the new wristwatch, doctor.
They checked everything.
Oh, yeah.
And they needed to make sure that I had all my parts and pieces, and I passed. And so they immediately wanted to start getting me all signed up into what they call the Aviation Reserve Officer Candidate Program. It's a reserve officer commission at the end.
Based on graduation from college?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And so there was a summer program that I went to, then I graduated from college, and there was still a little bit left on the summer program, so I went straight to Pensacola after graduation and went through some more weeks of some training down there, learning aerodynamics and engines and the technical parts and military bearing and how to carry a rifle and all that kind of stuff.
Who and what to salute.
Yeah, exactly.
Amen.
And then some of the military history, and I did really well with that program. They sent me to Softly Naval Air Station for training even before I was fully commissioned, because they just ran out of things to teach me beforehand. And I was flying as an E5.
That's what, sergeant?
So that, yeah, essentially, but that's a petty officer in the Navy. And so as an E5, I did some flights, and then they brought me back to Pensacola, marched one more time, was commissioned, an ensign. And from there, went straight out to further flight training, soloed T-34 Bravo, went up to Milton Field from Pensacola area, and Milton is just north of Pensacola, and flew the T-28. And after the T-28, they decided that, because Vietnam was starting to wind down a little bit, but they still needed helicopter pilots, they'd send me to fly helicopters. And
Did they give you the option or suggest?
You put down what you want, and they give you what they got.
Strange the way that happens.
Yeah, it's needs of the Navy and needs of the military will win out every time. And right then they needed some more helicopter pilots. So I got some helicopter training in the small jet Ranger type, and then the Bell Jet Ranger. And from there, I went to the H-1, the venerable Huey. And got my helicopter wings at a field called Ellison Field.
But you were qualified fixed wing too.
I was qualified in fixed wing as a lead up
to it. To the prologue.
Yeah. Well, which brings up an interesting point.
I thought it might.
Helicopter pilots are not restricted. We can fly fixed wing and we can fly helicopters. However, if you're a jet pilot and you've never flown helicopters, you just can't fly helicopters. You got to go back to helicopter training in order to do that.
Oh.
So they are restricted pilots. Now you'll probably get some reaction from some fixed wing pilots about that.
At least it's so somebody's watching the show.
But anyway, it's been wonderful because I received just about 5,000 hours of total flight time, and about half of it has been fixed wing and half of it has been flying helicopters. And the reason there's so much fixed wing there is because I got an immediate assignment after I got my wings back to VT2, the same squadron I'd done my training in, as an instructor pilot.
Oh.
Now, I don't give the Navy enough credit for determining that I had graduated from Springfield College and had a teaching certificate, and I knew how to teach physical skills, because that's what my 4 years of training was when I was at Springfield College.
Now, did you have anything like this in mind when you were going to select that school for training?
No, there was none of this was in mind at all. Yeah, but you bring up a curious the note as to why I picked the Navy. And we really should tell that story.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I had been thinking in the past about, which service I should join, because Vietnam was ongoing, the draft was ongoing. Everybody was getting a draft number. And people of that era, know what their draft numbers are. Mine was 314. So it was a really high draft number. I was not going to get drafted, but I had, at that point, when I received my draft number, already enlisted.
Any of your family?
And the reason was because my dad had served in World War II.
Oh, okay.
And he had served in the Army Air Corps, which then became the Air Force. He was an Air Force Reserve officer, and he was an individual who was a maintenance officer. He was colorblind, so he couldn't fly, but he still wanted to be involved in aviation. So that's probably where I picked up some of my aviation bent. But they took him flying a couple of times to work the engines. He was not behind the controls in a Marauder B-26. And they were really difficult to fly. Yeah. You had to keep your speed up. And for a while, there was a sort of a saying around MacDill, one a day in Tampa Bay.
Yeah.
When they were training for World War II. But I asked him once, because he had had military experience, "Hey, Dad," those questions that you always... Yeah, these are all those questions that you, as a dad, you always hope your sons will ask.
Yeah.
So anyway, I said, "Hey, Dad, how did you, what service do you think I should pick going forward? I mean, which service do you think is the best?"
Okay.
And he gave me a classic answer, I think. He said, "Well, which service do you think carries around the biggest refrigerators?"
The what?
The biggest refrigerators.
Oh, okay.
So here's Dad wanting to make sure his son's going to eat well, right?
Yeah.
So the Army, it's got to fit on the back of a truck. In the Air Force, they fly to places. How big of a refrigerator can you get on board an aircraft?
Okay.
Not so big. The Marine Corps, they eat out of MREs, meals ready
Yeah.
to eat. And at that point, it was K rations. No refrigerator involved. You know, it's really hard to carry a refrigerator on your back when they deploy, you know. So, but the Navy, those really big ships,
Bigger boats.
big boats, they carry really big refrigerators. And in all of my deployments and in all of my time on board ship, we've always eaten very well.
Oh, yeah.
So it was wonderful advice from Dad.
Well, they say the way to a man's heart through his stomach.
Well, you know, in this
wherever.
particular case, you know, if you're trying to choose a military service, and you want to make sure that you're going to eat well, you join the Navy. That's bottom line.
You're not plugging
So
anything.
that's the same advice I gave my kids. So
Okay.
none
Did
of
they-
which have served,
but
but
they're working on it,
it was
yeah.
the advice we talked about, so
Okay.
that they can give advice to others that they might meet. So anyway, where was I? I was
You were
talking
just
about
getting
going through flight training and being
yeah.
a flight instructor in the T-28, and I flew over 1,900 hours in the T-28.
Now, what is that in the length of time, in
So,
months or years? Or,
I served in the T-28 as a flight instructor for 2 years. So I flew 1,900 hours of total time. It included some of my flight instruction time when I probably got about 300 hours then. And so I must have had about 1,600 hours of flying in 2 years in the T-28.
Did any of
that's
your
a lot
students
fun.
ever cause you any hiccups or problems?
The T-28?
Yeah.
Oh, golly, you want to hear about some of those flight emergencies?
We've got 2 or 3 minutes.
Well, you got to remember that the T-28 was built around 48 to 51.
19, not, okay.
Yeah, yeah, 1948 to 1950. It was right after World War II. It looked like a World War II fighter bomber. It had a really big radial engine on the front of it, 1,250 horsepower R1820. The aircraft had big dihedral wings, burned 115, 145 gas. Was fast, but if it went too fast, it really shook a lot. So you didn't fly it, you know,
Wasn't well
over
balanced.
300 knots very often. And it was a reasonably complex aircraft to fly, much more complex than a jet, because instead of in a jet just go fast, go slow, you had you know a regular throttle with an RPM adjustment and also a mixture adjustment to run the engine. So it was 3 levers that you had to control. And the aircraft, I did lose an engine on this aircraft at one point.
Oh.
So if you really if you want that emergency, I'll tell it.
Well,
You want that one?
sure.
Okay.
It adds to the juice.
So this is when I was, you know, still an ensign, getting ready to become a JG.
Okay, the question is, at this point in time, were you or were you not married?
I was not married.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't get married until 1976, and that was and also a reasonably long story about.
Well, let's get to it first.
Let's get the engine emergency
okay.
first. So, I had flown over to Fort Rucker. So this ties in nicely with some stories I get to tell some of my Army buddies, because that's where all of the basic training for helicopter aviation is in the Army.
Where is it
Fort
located?
Rucker, outside of Dothan, Alabama.
Oh, okay. All right.
So it's not that far away. So I had flown over there because the helicopter ground-controlled approach pattern is relatively short. And I could cycle around that pattern and get a lot of sign-offs from my students reasonably quickly. If you go to the Air Force, they want to take you out maybe like 12 miles, but the Army, nice short pattern, lots of reps. They really liked it because they had a really hard time getting fixed wing sign-offs because there's all these helicopters around, not very many fixed wing. So I was giving them a training benefit. So every time I came around, there was another guy sitting at the microphone working the ground control approach pattern. A ground control approach pattern gives you an opportunity to have someone talk you down a glide slope. You made sure that you were on center line and on the right altitude.
Yeah.
So that when you broke out of the clouds, you saw the runway right in front of you.
Almost saw the end of the runway.
So we're doing that. And I was just turning to what they call a base leg, about 6 miles down from the approach end of the runway, at 1,200 feet with my gear down, flaps down, ready to go, you know, in a landing configuration. and I got a low oil pressure, high oil temperature, sump light, which means there's metal in the sump, and it started running kind of rough. So my engine's coming apart. So I had previously done some study on the charts to be able to set the throttle, set the RPM at a setting that would minimize the piston slap when the engine was, the radial engine was rotating. So if you could limit that piston slap, it would mean that the engine really wouldn't be using the bearings, because when you start getting a lot of metal, it means your bearings are getting
You're
beaten
going
up.
shot, yeah.
Yeah. And ultimately, when they took this engine out of the aircraft, they took a ball of metal out that was about as big around as a grapefruit.
Equal how many bearings?
Well, that was the master rod bearing had
Okay.
completely gone, and it was just dust.
Well, almost a dead sick landing then.
So what happened was that the engine was still running. I was still coaching some horsepower out of it. So I pulled up the gear, pulled up the flaps, wanted to be clean as I could. Oh, by the way, it was at night. And so
it wasn't raining too, was it?
No, it wasn't raining,
Okay.
thank goodness, but it was at night. And so I'd obviously broken right off from the GCA, and they figured out right away something was going on. So they called me up and asked me what was happening. I said, well, I'm declaring an emergency. I've got a rough runner. I got 2 on board. I got umpteenth hundreds of gallons of aviation gasoline on board. That's part of the emergency procedure when you're declaring emergency. And then told them I'm going to try to make it back to the field. And they said, okay. I suggest switching to tower. And so they switched me to tower. So I went up on tower, gave them the rundown, and the guy said, okay, which runway are you going to try to make? And I said, well, I'm not sure I'm going to make any of them.
Oh, were you over a populated
So,
area?
I was over a bunch of pine trees.
Oh, okay.
So it was going to be the pine trees or the...
Yeah, White House wouldn't like that.
it was either going to be pine trees or it was going to be the runway. I was hoping for the runway. And but it was at night, so I said, I don't know what runway I'm going to be able to sneak this thing into. So and let's make it daylight. Turn on all the lights. I can't pick a runway. Turn on all the lights.
I'll go for the glory.
And the tower operator, he was so funny. He came back and trying to take some of the pressure off the situation, I guess. But I knew what I was doing, but you never know where you're going to end up. And he said, I've been waiting for 15 years for somebody to ask me to turn them all on. Stand by. And then as I'm looking out of the, my student had, he'd given up flying his instrument flight at that point. So he had opened up the hood that was covering his eyes so he could practice in the dark, and do instrument landings. So he was looking out, but blink, 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 blink. All these lights were going on
You had the
all
horizon.
over the airfield. So I think I must have dimmed the lights in Dothan, Alabama that night. He was so funny. He turned them all on. So suddenly I got daylight out in front of me. And so I struggled it to a high key, came around to line up into the wind as best I could do it. And as soon as my wheels touched the deck, I pulled a little back on that throttle, and the engine went choo and froze.
Froze?
So now I'm rolling down the runway, without, the prop turning. And I let the momentum carry me off into a parking area between the runways. And, fire crews were all there. They all came running out. They helped me pin the gear to make sure that I wasn't going to have any gear collapses because I didn't have any hydraulic pressure any longer.
To lock them up,
And, lock the gear where they were supposed to be with the pins and, chock the aircraft. And I, started, closing up the aircraft. But before I turned off battery power, I talked to the tower and thanked them for their good use. And they said, you see that helo out in front of you? And there was an H-1 parked about 300 yards over in another parking area. I said, I got him. He says, he was waiting for you. I said, oh, good.
Yeah.
So we got so I shut off all my electricity, shut the canopy, put it all away, and told the tower folks that maintenance would be coming to visit. And they said, well, make sure they bring a tow bar because we can't move that aircraft. And but I was off the runway, so we weren't obscuring anything. And so I climbed into the helo. They didn't have me go in and fill out any reports or anything. They were cool. And the helicopter pilot said, yep, I was waiting for you. Figured this was going to work two ways. Either I was going to be rescuing you out of the woods or giving you a ride home.
Either salvation or search.
So I told them that I was glad that we were doing a ride home, and that was a good thing. at 1,200 feet, you don't bail out. This aircraft had no ejection seat, so I mean, you were committed to riding it down. So I was glad to get it to a runway. But that was probably the opportunity for the aircraft experience that I've had to hurt me more than any of the others. But the T-28, I had a lot of confidence in that machine. It was even though it was a single engine aircraft, I always felt comfortable flying it.
You have to have a comfort zone someplace.
Oh yeah.
Okay, now.
Yep.
Where to now?
After I left the training command, I went straight off to HM-12, which where I was transitioning into the H-53.
Now, HM means what?
Now, the HM stands for Helicopter Mine Countermeasures.
Okay,
and
that's
we were doing,
I want to get that in there. Yeah.
Yep. We were doing airborne mine countermeasures, towing mine-sweeping equipment to clear channels of water so that ships could follow without risk of hitting a seaborne mine. And there's floating mines, there's bottom mines, there's tethered mines. Floater mines are illegal. You're not supposed to have them, but during Desert Shield, Desert Storm, we saw a lot of those. We'll talk about them later on, I think. But I think that the minesweeping community is rather unloved, but still very, very necessary to make sure that our ships can have freedom of the
clear
seas.
depth, yeah.
Freedom of the seas is a critical issue. And, if you're in a narrow channel someplace and you see somebody push a large barrel into the water and he comes back and declares it a mine, that's an issue. That's a big problem. How do you know it's not a mine?
Okay.
You don't know.
Question.
You have to go out and prove it.
How do you outfit your helicopter? What is all your gear suspended inside, like in a bomb bay or something, so that as you can take off, and then when you get over your area, you can lower it in and then make your courses, and you can't turn too fast at that stuff.
Right, exactly. You're tethered to stuff that you're towing in the water, but there's a whole bunch of different types of equipment. One type is what they call mechanical gear. It's just a string of long wires with chippers on them and cutters, otters to make it sink to the appropriate depth, and buoys to keep them from sinking too far. And you launch these things out of the back of the aircraft and then tow it with the aircraft flying along at about 50 feet.
Okay, to cut the line.
And it goes along in a pattern that goes out like this, and so it's pretty wide.
Okay.
And as a mine chain gets caught on the wire, it chips down through the chippers, gets caught in a cutter, and a shotgun shell goes off and breaks the chain. Then this mine floats to the surface. Now you have a floater, and you send another aircraft with a 50 caliber machine gun to come out and pop it. Yeah. Yep. And it works. It will cut a chain and or a wire.
Does that have the same kind of gear that some of the blimps used to have when it's for sub patrols?
I don't know if they might have used that for subs, but if they're dangling something in the water, the principle would have been the same. Yeah. So if you got all this stuff in the water behind you, the aircraft has to turn around the equipment that you're towing. So it's really restricted maneuverability in the aircraft when it's under tension. Towing all this stuff flies at a kind of a strange nose down right-leaning attitude like as it's pulling all of this stuff through the water. We also have sleds, and these sleds have got hydrofoils that we can lower down. The sleds have got jet engines on them of their own with fuel tanks, so that we can produce an electrical signal. And this electrical signal produces a magnetic signature behind it. We put a noisemaker on the end of this long tail that streams out behind it that produces this magnetic field, so that when we tow it through the water, it looks like there's a really big capital ship making a whole bunch of prop noise. And obviously what that is attempting to do is to get a bottom mine to sense a ship going by
to bring it up.
And then blowing up to take the ship out. However, the mine guys, people that build mines and try to counter these devices, they get tricky too. They can put mine counters in. So the first time you go by, it goes, okay, that's one ship. The second ship goes by. Okay, that's the second ship. Third one goes by. Oh, hey, 3 ships. But we always know that they send through some smaller ships, and then they'll send a capital ship. We're going to go off on the 4th ship. So we got to sweep some of these places that we think there might be a bottom line a whole bunch of times to make sure that we can clear, to make sure that they don't get the 4th ship. How about that?
That takes a lot of G2.
So there's a lot, and then of course, you know, they can say, all right, we're not going to go off for little ships. We only want to go off for big ships. And if you know, with the things that they can do now with a handheld calculator, they can put those same kind of electronics into a mine and make it really smart. So you got to be smart at kind of countering it. So in some cases, you're never going to trick it. So you just better find it and eliminate it otherwise. And so then they came up with other gear for us to launch, side-looking sonar. So we can tow that through the water at various depths, look out to the sides, and see things on the bottom. But it sees old refrigerators, it sees old garbage cans, it sees all kinds of stuff. And then we have markers that we can drop and gauge where these things are, and then relocate them later and swim down and eliminate them.
Do you ever work in concert with a Minesweeper?
Yes.
So that you're up here and you can say, hey guys, go give a bearing and a herring and take it off.
And of course, what Bob's talking about here is shipboard minesweeping. And shipboard minesweepers don't necessarily like to make that first sweep. They want us to go first.
Oh yeah, what the hell?
So we clear a section as best we can, and then the minesweeping ships can go through and further widen channels, or bring in the EOD crews that can swim down and actually physically locate a target that we've seen to see what it is.
Yeah.
You know, they can go up there with their cameras and so forth and take pictures of them, put charges on them, and then you know they swim away. They get out of the water, and then they can blow them up. Yeah.
Good.
Those guys are heroes. And I've got other EOD stories from the Persian Gulf we can tell too.
It's your show.
Yeah. Well, we were going through the chronicle of my military career, so we better continue on that. So HM 12, I did a lot of flight instruction with all of the instrument instruction that I'd given when I was in the T-28. I had a whole lot of instrument time, whole lot of time in clouds. I did a lot of instrument instruction in the helicopter, you know, where mostly helicopter pilots don't fly in the clouds very often. I had a lot of instrument time, so I was able to teach a lot of that. So my flight instruction experiences continued even in helicopters.
Well, as you're becoming more proficient, how are you in grade? For ensign?
Oh yeah, you know, ensign, Lieutenant JG, lieutenant commander, progressed all through the period of time when I was in the HM communities. I took one break in my time in the H-53 community, and I went to the USS Shreveport as the air boss. Now the air boss is required on amphibious ships and aircraft carriers for running the flight deck. And the LPD-12 USS Shreveport had 2 landing helicopter spots, and so I was the air boss.
One aft, fore, and one aft?
Yeah, fore and aft on the rear end. The front end of the ship looked like a regular ship. The rear end had these 2 flight decks. So I took care of the flight deck end, and you know, we had a CO, an XO. The XO took care of the front end, and I had the back end, and so that was my charge. And I was the 3rd senior individual on the ship as a lieutenant commander. And we deployed a bunch of places, and we did a large amount of landings.
Were you also in charge of maintenance and all the support, everything?
Yeah. Oh yeah. As the air boss, I had all of the air department stuff.
That's your bag.
That was my stuff. All the air department stuff, included the fuel systems that we refueled aircraft with, and you know, the team that I had to run the flight deck. I had a bunch of various colored shirts on the flight deck. Yeah. We all wear colored shorts to identify.
Green, all that,
yeah, all that. You've heard of that one before. You know, I had you know, the guys that ran the chains out. I had guys that did the fueling. I had guys that did firefighting and so forth. Oh, a little side story. When I first checked on board, the silver firefighting suits that my firefighting team had were just in not great shape. So here's a little bit of a New Hampshire connection. What's Globe firefighter suits up in Pittsfield, New Hampshire, make firefighter suits. I knew this. So I went
You
into
look for the label before you put them
so
on.
I went into the Navy supply system, and I found the Globe firefighting team from Pittsfield, New Hampshire, who made these suits. And I told my supply officer, "You order those," and we did. So my team got brand new firefighting suits right after I got on board, so it would be ready for
You
any
still enjoy
emergencies.
that contact?
So yeah, I've told these guys before, and they were, it was a good connection. Yeah, they're a good group up there. They run a nice shop. But anyway, we during that period of time deployed to our biggest deployment was one to Europe. And of course, we had planned on making all of these wonderful port stops and all of these wonderful areas, and our wives were going to fly out, and I'd gotten married by then, and visit with us during our med cruise. But
A paid honeymoon.
well, an additional one from what I'd had
no.
previously, but all of the around the med port visits, like Naples and
Now, this is the Red
so
Sea
forth.
where you went, wasn't it?
So this is ultimately where we ended up.
Oh, okay.
But that was a later event. But while I was on the Shreveport, and we were in the North Sea doing an exercise with the Marines ashore, one of the things that occurred was that we got a call to make max fast with the Marines on board to Beirut, Lebanon. We were the first amphibious ready group to be in Beirut, Lebanon for a longer period of time. We were there for about 3 months, anchored 1,200 yards offshore. Anchored 1,200 yards offshore puts you into mortar range, by the way, so I was never really comfortable with being anchored 1,200 yards offshore, but we had a causeway, the Incheon was there with us, in addition to I was on the Shreveport, and then a couple of LSTs were also in that force. And the Incheon didn't want to be at flight quarters as much because their flight deck was bigger and they had a larger crew. I decided, and I offered, to use my flight deck as the ready deck, because we were going to be at flight quarters early in the morning to send the hot cooked breakfast in large vacuum jerry cans to the Marines every morning. And then every evening, these empty cans from the dinner, which was cooked by another ship, were coming back to us. So I had a bunch of rules for getting those cans back. The cans had to be back on board in time for my crew to shut down and get to the evening movie. And the evening movie call was at 8 o'clock. So those cans better be on board at 7:30, or else you don't get your gift the next morning. And these Marine crews who were flying H-46s would land, would load all these cans on board a single aircraft, and then they'd fly ashore and deliver breakfast. And then they'd bring those cans back. And the crew that brought them back picked them up the next morning. So I figured this out real quick. I was going to incentivize these Marine pilots and crews to get here on time so that my crew could get to the movie on
In the
time.
movies, yeah.
I took
That's
care of my
important.
guys.
That's
You have to
damn
take
right,
care of
boy.
your guys.
You get a lot of brownie points.
So, it's not that the popcorn was that great, but, getting to the movie was, important for these guys. There was not much to do anchored 1,200 yards offshore Beirut, Lebanon. So
What was the purpose of being there?
Well, we were there
politically?
because of the unrest between the Lebanese, the Syrians, the Hezbollah, and it was a great unrest civil war going on in Lebanon, and President Reagan decided he was going to try to protect Beirut from itself and from any bad things going on. A lot of bad actors in the area. There was a massacre in a little town called Sabra. And we were there to prevent that stuff from happening again.
Good.
So it was important to be there and to try to bring.
Was the Marine contingent ashore?
Yeah, we put the Marine contingent ashore. That's why we had to send all this food ashore. There was we had the entire amphibious ready group occupying the area surrounding the Beirut airport, and they had tanks and everything there. So they had a good group of equipment ashore that they brought
Brother was
ashore
there in force.
via a military causeway, which we had been carrying around with us, and we put it to use. It was like amphibious invasion in a sense.
Okay.
But one that was unopposed, we went ashore with the Marines. So they were getting a lot of training from that. in addition to providing the calming force to the city. But the the whole idea of having a flight deck that would be ready all day long was important. And so I had this really long period of flight quarters. Those cans have got to get back. I got to get my guys some rest.
The tin can Navy.
So in the morning, when they were picking them up, and it was the same crew that dropped them off the night before, if they dropped them off on time,
they could eat.
They got hot cross buns from the coffee.
Little pogey bait.
We had guys coming out with a tray with coffee cups, a pitcher, cream, sugar, hot cross buns. They poured all their individual cups. I mean, it was like bedside service for these Marines. And my crew carried all the cans on board and strapped them all down, while the crew chief and his helper were both also getting coffee and donuts or whatever was the bun of the morning. So they got really used to that. And then a crew missed. They didn't get their hot cross buns the next morning.
Oh,
they loaded their own aircraft. They never missed again.
Tell me, Silas.
But anyway, being in Beirut, Lebanon was an interesting case. They were trying to maintain all of this normalcy, but I was not ever comfortable with that.
Okay, that's what you alluded to here as rapid response.
Yeah.
You 24
Well, that was a second event.
Another one?
Yeah, that was a second event.
I'm jumping ahead.
But, that was part. But anyway, being in Beirut was an interesting experience. We departed. The next amphibious ready group came in. They set up pretty much the same way. And it was at that event that the truck bomb hit the sleeping barracks there for the Marines and blew up, I think it was around 240 Marines. There was an Army guy involved and a couple of Army guys too. So, I mean, it was awful. And it was our first, military involvement. There was some embassy bombings and things like that going on. But, of this type of terrorism where somebody was going to be a suicide bomber. And it was a wake-up, if you will, I think, to the military of some of those issues. For example, this was way before USS Cole. I had these two sailboats that were getting closer and closer and closer to the tail end of my ship at anchor. They were just doing tacking, coming closer and closer. And even though I had my flight deck speakers tuned to the absolute max, trying to make sure that they realized
stay off.
That they need to stay off, they were in danger, they wouldn't pay any attention. Well, I said, all right, I got to take care of this, because this is dangerous for them, it's dangerous for us. So Marines on the flight deck, and these two Marines snapped to attention. I mean, this sounded like God, because my flight deck speakers were really loud. Go aft on the flight deck. So they knew where aft was, and they went back. And you see those two sailboats? One of them gave me a thumbs up. Marines, lock and load. How long do you think it took? Like a half a heartbeat, and those guys are slamming their magazines into their M16s and chambering that top round. There's something about that sound that carried really clearly
to the mic,
to those two little sailboats. Those two little sailboats turned and let the wind blow them away as fast as the wind would carry them. So we had, Marines at this stage were really bored. They were really not doing a lot except for guarding some posts and things of that sort. So I stood down the Marines, and the guys turned around. They had grins going from one ear to the other. I'm sure they were corporals, and I think they had to go back and tell the story to their sergeants of how they had gotten a command. They weren't sure who it was from, but it was over those flight deck speakers.
Topside.
and they had to, chamber around. So chambering around, that's it's a thing, and they have to report. So, but they didn't shoot anything, which was good.
Why did they say lock and load when you're loading and lock?
Oh, you'll have to ask a Marine that question.
Well,
so
I've
you
been
get a
after
Marine,
that for 70 years.
I will set you up with a guy, his name is Lieutenant Colonel Bancroft McKittrick, and he will explain all that Marine Corps experience. How's that sound? But anyway, we finished up in Beirut, and we finally got a chance to go home, and then I went back to HM-14, and I was the minesweeping guy, working on all the minesweeping equipment within the helicopter squadron as the minesweeping maintenance officer and ops, and then I ultimately became the operations officer. But we got a JCS rapid response mission. That was the one you were referring to, to go to the Red Sea and ports around the Suez Canal to determine whether or not Libya, Gaddafi, had mined those approaches and areas so that he could disrupt traffic through the Red Sea and bother the rest of the nations. This was during his nasty period. And we always had it part of our charter to spool up and head out quickly. Mm-hmm. And so we did that. We headed out in C-5s, landed at Rota, put our aircraft together, got them aboard the USS Shreveport again, and got underway to ports in the Red Sea. And some of us flew all the way to Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. I was with that group, and we put our aircraft together there and did other work off of the Great White Ghost of the Arabian coast. I think the name of the ship was the Dubuque. But anyway, it was another LPD.
You didn't have to do any humanitarian flights, so weren't you tasked for that?
The task was to make sure that the Red Sea and the Suez Canal were free of mines. So we did our normal mine-sweeping stuff that I described earlier throughout all of those areas. The king of Saudi Arabia wanted to make sure that when he went on his cruises on his yacht that he was going to be safe. So we were helping to take care of that.
Good to keep the Sultan
happy. We had a Saudi experience, and the Middle East is its own strange thing, and so that was my first taste of it before returning to Desert Shield, Desert Storm. So we returned from that after some number of weeks, and I had an experience of time working for the CNO at Federal Building Number 2, just up the hill from the Pentagon. Spent a lot of time in the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., and then subsequently from there got deployed, well, not deployed, but permanent change of station orders. Now I've got 4 kids to Japan.
So?
Yeah, I went to Yokosuka, Japan, and was on the staff of 7th Fleet. 7th Fleet has an area of operation, or an AOR, or area of responsibility from the international date line all the way out to the east coast of Africa, with a cutout for CENTCOM, the Central Command, where the Persian Gulf is, and in the Mideast nations. So we had a pretty big area of responsibility, and we went on some cruises around Japan, and we visited Hong Kong. And
will your family go with you then?
The family did go with me to Yokosuka, Japan.
Yeah.
And all 4 kids, all in Navy housing at Yokosuka, and we had some experiences with sailing the USS Blue Ridge, our command ship, all the way around Australia, Perth, Fremantle, Hobart in Tasmania, Sydney and Brisbane were our ports of call, where we coordinated with the Australian Navy. We did exercises with the Australian Navy, and this was all command and control kinds of stuff because we were a command ship, the Blue Ridge.
Flag officers were aboard?
Flag officers were doing their receptions, and we were getting all of our tours, and we were having all kinds of fun.
It's rough duty.
Rough duty in Australia. I think the whole discovery of craft beers must have been there, because every single city, every single hamlet had their own brewery and their own special brews, and of course we had to try them all.
Right.
But I think that the other thing about the 7th Fleet and the Blue Ridge was that we were a ready crew, because we always had our staff on board the ship. So JCS again calls up and says, "How fast, Admiral, can you get your crew underway to go to the Persian Gulf in reaction to the Iraqis moving into Kuwait?" And he said, "How fast do you want us? We're ready. We can go now."
Tell me when.
They ended up giving us 3 days to get feed water on board and get the ship ready in the stores and all of that, but we were launching. And it was a funny activation. We were all in church. Well, all of the staffs and everybody. The admiral sat in the front row, and then all the captains sat in the second row, and I was sitting behind him. I was a commander at the time. And the front row beepers all started going off right in the middle of church. Then the second row beepers
In
all
church?
in church. We were
Oh, okay.
We're sitting
These
in,
don't work too well.
we're sitting in Sunday morning church.
Okay, having
So
a
the
quiet
second row beepers started going off. I leaned over to my spouse. I said, Susie, this can't be good. I better go too. So all the admirals got up and left. All the captains got up and left. I left. And we reported into the ship to find out what was going on. We had heard some inklings of what was happening because we reading the traffic, but we were getting launched, and we were out of there and on our way to the Persian Gulf. So the ship and all of the ships throughout the 7th Fleet all got underway for the Persian Gulf.
Oh, didn't it?
So suddenly Yokosuka was a ghost town of about 6 guys, and all the rest, the spouses and the others. There was a couple of doctors at the hospital, the captain of the base, and some maintenance guys were the only men left on the base. Of course, we were deploying everybody.
Everybody go.
Everybody. This was 1990, late in 1990. And anyway, it took us about 2 weeks to make our way over there with refuelings and whatnot along the way, and we were doing a lot of prep work. We steamed up in through the Straits of Hormuz into the Persian Gulf, and then over into Bahrain to park for a bit, and we started a 24-hour-a-day battle watch to make all the preparations and to start the staff processing for all of the planning that had to go into the prosecution of Desert Shield, and then following.
You had carriers
Storm.
and battleships and everything.
Ultimately, there were 6 carrier battle groups there. Don't ask me to list them, but 6 carrier battle groups.
That's a lot of boom.
We had carriers in the Persian Gulf and just on the south side of the Straits of Hormuz, and then also in the Red Sea, and I think we actually had one up in the Med there too. Their flight had to be a pretty long one.
But they were good backup.
But they were all there. They all launched. And one of the things that happened during that period of war and the prep for the war was that everybody that had a cruise missile got to shoot at least one.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody that had one shot one. And that included all the submarines that were attached to the battle groups, and all of the small boys that had one shot one, at least one.
Now, the Polaris missile be considered?
No, that's not. No, we were only talking about cruise missiles here, not
Okay.
Polarises. Now, I can't tell you they weren't there, but
I
they
didn't
weren't.
see
They
'em.
weren't going to use them.
No.
But they all had these cruise missiles, the TLAMs, the ones that you hear about shooting now were shot then. And of course, we had the battle plan, so we knew right when they were going to be cruising down Main Street, Baghdad. So we would go and listen to Wolf Blitzer on the TV. Would connect and
Old CNN.
CNN would be, taking a. Oh, I think we hear something coming, and they would take the shot, and you could see the cruise missile flying up Main Street and hitting something further down.
Attention getter.
Yeah. You would actually have it on the camera. No. It was crazy. But deconflicting with an air plan where all the aircraft were, all the TLAMs were, and keeping them all out of each other's ways when you had Navy and you had Marine Corps and you had Air Force, all trying to fly to targets, and deconflicting all of those targets was a real drill. It really
Logistics
was.
nightmare.
Yeah, it was very, very interesting. But I was on the staff. I was the Fleet Mine Warfare Officer, so I was also the Mine Warfare Officer for what they called COM-USNAV CENT, or the Commander U.S. Forces Central Command for the prosecution of Desert Shield, Desert Storm. There's books that are about that thick that describe all kinds of details, so we're just getting an overview here. But the Iranians were not real good at deploying mines. They would put the mines out there, and they were supposed to be floating on wires, but they'd get loose, and they were floaters, and floaters are really bad because you never know where they're going to go.
Where they're going to be.
But the Iranians didn't really care because they didn't have any ships at sea. Only the U.S. was at sea, and the bad guys knew that, and so they didn't care, and they didn't want to be out there anyway dropping mines. And so they went out there and just scattered some mines around and then left, and and left them wherever they were, and didn't keep track of where they were. And, international rules were all broken. So, but a floating mine is a huge problem. So, what do you do to fix a mine that's a floater? How do you find that? Well, we had a little bit of GPS. The GPS constellation at this particular stage was not complete yet. So there was a blackout period of about 45 minutes to an hour in the middle of the night. But it was slowly creeping into daylight. So the reason we needed it so badly was because when a ship saw a floater mine, they would give us a GPS lat-long position. Then we'd ship out on an aircraft, a helicopter, that had GPS installed, kind of rudimentary, however, because it was so early in the development of GPS. We'd get these things out of Radio Shack and tape them to the dashboards of the aircraft, plug them in. We had electrical power there, but would plug them in, string these antennas up, so they could get the signals out to the satellites and so forth, but very rudimentary. But we'd reposition to the lat long with that device, do a search pattern, refine the mine, and then have a crewman, an EOD guy, jump in, swim over to it, collect the intel from it, put a limpet mine on it, swim away. Brave guys, these guys. Brave guys. I mean, approach a mine, play with it, then swim away, and then get back on board the helicopter through a hoist lift, get off to the side, and then explode it. And it would either secondary explode or it would make a hole in it and it would sink. Either way, it was now safe.
No, if you would. EOD stands for what? Electronic?
It's explosive ordnance disposal.
Okay.
Yeah. So they were these guys.
UDT in my day.
Yeah, UDT, and they were absolutely great guys. There's no question about it, and very smart and very skilled. They have to be. Their lives depend on it.
And physically fit, no body fat.
They're kind of like pilots. They have to be.
Oh, come on.
They have to be very smart.
Yeah.
If you want to stay alive, you got to be very smart. Anyway, the problem was as this blackout period was getting into the middle of the daytime, and then that would be just plain dangerous. We wouldn't be able to continue to do the job.
Yeah.
So there were 5 Center for Naval Analysis guys on board this ship. They were pretty smart. They didn't have a thing to do. So I said, well, okay, I'm going to task them. Hey guys, how do we fix this? Make some phone calls, use the bat phone, and try it. Now, okay, what's the bat phone, right? Well, the bat phone was a special phone that we had that if you picked it up, and within 3 seconds, this very pleasant voice on the other end would say, "Good afternoon. This is the Pentagon. Who would you like to speak to?" Yeah. Who? Not the phone number. Who? You would tell them who, and they'd connect you and call you back. And it's all Stu 3 or which was secure phone and all of that. But anyway, we figured out that the best way to fix this hole and to get the blackout period back into the middle of the night, so it wouldn't be such a problem, not only for us but for the Army guys driving tanks and the people out in the field that were trying to find their way through the desert with small handheld GPS receivers and that kind of thing. But they didn't know I was working on it, but I knew I needed to fix it for my EOD guys, so I went to work on that. And they came back to me and said, well, there's a satellite that would help fill that hole, move the blackout period back in the middle of the night, but it's on the launch pad and NASA doesn't want to launch it yet. They still got other things they want to attach to the satellite before they launch it. Okay, now it's my job. So I sat down at my Selectric OCR typewriter, the old style, wrote a message, flash precedence, to the Pentagon and to NASA, and basically said, launch it, and took it up to the Admiral. Said, Admiral, got a message for you, flash precedence. I said, whoa, what we got flash precedence today? And I said, well, we're going to launch a satellite. We're going to what?
Yeah.
So I explained it to him, and he goes, yep, makes sense. He signed it.
Yeah.
I ran it up to comms. They flashed it out. Within 18 hours, I had a satellite in orbit. Wow. Filled that part of the constellation.
Okay, just filled the arc. Eh?
Moved the dark part back to the middle of the night. Went from about nearly an hour down to about 15 minutes. And the war continued as if nothing had ever happened. Nobody really even knew about it. I don't even think it's in that big thick book I was telling you about. But I launched a satellite as a commander on the ComUSNAV staff. All right, that's a pretty cool story.
Lots of chutzpah.
Yeah, you got to have your head around what the problem is, and then try to figure out how to fix it before it becomes a necessary emergency.
It's better to make an error on commission than omission.
Well, you don't want an emergency to occur because GPS was not there. You need to anticipate and solve the problem before it actually happens. That's a key point.
Good deal.
That's a key point. Have we run out of time? Is there more stories to tell?
We've got, I think, 4 minutes and 45 seconds.
Well, I could tell another story about the amphibious landing, but maybe we should talk about what's happened post-retirement a little bit, too.
That's exactly where I'm going to go. Yeah. You retired in 93.
I had all of these adventures, thoroughly enjoyed my military career, went back to Meridian Air Station in Meridian, Mississippi. I flew helicopters and a C-12, which is a Super King Air. Best job ever. And then retired in 1993. Moved back to the state of New Hampshire, best state in the nation, #1 state for veterans. I'm claiming that.
I'll back that up.
There you go.
You get 2 votes.
There you go. And then started working with a major wirehouse firm. I don't think this forum will mind me mentioning that it's Merrill Lynch. I've been working there now for coming up on 24 years since 1993. So it's been a wonderful experience there. But what it's allowed me to do is to have some extra time to also work with veteran groups across the state of New Hampshire. I'm currently the president for the 3rd time of the Military Officers Association of America.
Which means what?
Which is a veteran service organization. It's the New Hampshire chapter, and I'm the president of that group. I've worked with Easter Seals Veterans Count on their executive board since 2007, which gives a hand up, not a handout, to those that are having issues. It's a whole new program that you could talk about here.
Well, you said you had been party to this.
I have been involved in the 211 program and making sure that when I was working also with the State Veterans Advisory Committee to get this program promulgated out, but making sure also that all the providers that are providing military programs that are calling in and becoming a part of this, they have now what's called a military protocol. So you call in and identify yourself as military, or they get the hint that you're military from the way that you speak. They will ask you, did you or any member of your family ever serve in the military? That's been a program that has been promulgated here through the state of New Hampshire for some time now, and is really critical for any provider to always ask, have you or any member of your family ever served in the military? And if you say yes, they go to a military protocol, a whole lot of more organizations that can help you when you call into this social network phone number. And this social network phone number is there to solve issues, solve the problems. And Easter Seals Veterans Count can also help do that. For example, if you're about to be homeless or you are homeless and you're a veteran, call Veterans Count. I don't have the number in front of me, but it's available. 211 will give it to you, and they'll have you in lodging within a day. That's the promise. And they deliver that.
Amen.
Yeah. So that's Veterans Count. But the other part of what we do is, and what I've done as part of my retired experience, is that I have been appointed by the Secretary of the Army to be his civilian aide for the state of New Hampshire. Now, this is a direct link between the Secretary of the Army and the state of New Hampshire, and the state of New Hampshire and the Secretary of the Army. I have had opportunities where I've been able to go directly to his staff in the Pentagon on issues, and there's been opportunities where I've been able to give greetings on behalf of the Secretary to the state of New Hampshire at various events.
Wonderful. One question: how did you get to be appointed or selected?
How did I get to be selected? Well, I've been so involved in military events across the state of New Hampshire since I retired. Either the chair or the vice chair of the State Veterans Advisory Committee for some number of years. I'm a member now. Involved with the Military Officers Association, involved with the ESGR, the Employer Support for the Guard and Reserve.
Okay, State Guard.
Yeah, State Guard. And when the previous gent, Griff Delanus, passed away, or when he was too ill to continue, they had to replace him. He was the previous civilian aide. And so the word went out, and he recommended that I sign up for it. Senator Kelly Ayotte and Senator Jean Shaheen both wrote letters of recommendation. The Pentagon, they're pretty smart folk.
They pick by smart people.
You've got to remember that both Jean Shaheen and Kelly Ayotte were both sitting on the Senate Armed Services Committee.
Mm-hmm.
So they've gotten letters from both recommending that I become the civilian aide to the Secretary of the Army. They both sit on the Senate Armed Services Committee. Yeah, what are they going to do,
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
But anyway.
So it all went well.
Oh.
But I was...
excuse me.
As a Navy guy, the civilian aide to the Secretary of the Army does not have to be an Army guy.
Okay.
Many of them didn't even serve.
Oh.
But the civilian aides are this incredible group of about 105 now.
Around the nation?
Around the entire nation. Every state gets at least one.
All right.
Many get more than one, and because they've got higher concentrations of Army. And we are a brain trust.
Okay.
If the Army comes up with a problem they're not quite comfortable with, they want to talk about it, there's enough people that have got enough influence in enough places around the nation, we can figure that one out.
Okay. I hate to say this, but...
Are we running out of time?
Out. 3 words.
Well, I didn't even get a chance to talk to you about recruiting.
I know. They say here. Thank you, buddy.
Thank you.
Great.
It's always been a pleasure to speak with
you.
Thank you.
That's a wrap, folks. That hour went by a little bit extra, too, but the simple idea is this. Extend here. Each one of us had a job to do, regardless of the service or the conflict, and we did it. The problem, though, is if you don't tell your story, nobody else will, and we've lost all that history. Every one of us had a little different take on what we had to do and why, but the important thing is we did it. So if you're so inclined, please come and see us. The address will be in the back of the program, how to get a hold of us. Bob Stevens saying thank you. Stay healthy. Goodbye.